Hey everybody, I'm Katharine Zaleski, co-founder and president of PowertoFly. I'm here today with a webinar that we're doing in conjunction with Indeed Prime, where we have special guests from Elpha and The Zebra with us to talk about how to decide if a company's culture is right for you. So PowertoFly has done over 80 events in the last 12 months. We do a lot of virtual chats as well with leading companies out there. Particularly excited about today's chat because these are two companies that are near and dear to my heart. And you're going to hear a little bit more about, we're going to hear more specifically from both Katharine and Manajay about their backgrounds and their bios before we get into the different topics that you've all submitted throughout the RSVP process. So let's go to the next slide, please. Before I'm going to kick off the formal agenda, though, first, I would like to go over a little bit of housekeeping. I want to make abundantly clear to everybody that this is really an interactive webinar. So first off, in case you're disconnected from the online presentation or have a bad connection, you can call in from a landline. You can find your unique dial-in number in your audio panel. Everybody is muted by default. So please put in your questions into the questions panel that you see on the GoToWebinar control panel there. We're going to be taking questions as they come in as well. And but we're also going to be starting with a number of pre-submitted questions that you put in during the RSVP process. So again, if you start adding your questions in now, we can start queuing them up. Great. So finally, the presentation will be recorded so that we can send it out afterwards in case you miss anything. So let's pop to the agenda now before we meet our panel. So as I said, Manajay and Katharine are going to introduce themselves a little bit more. Then we're going to have a conversation on what it means to be a culture fit. We're going to weave in your questions as they come in. I already got a question from Natasha that says, will this be recorded? And yes, it will be recorded. And then we're also going to leave extra time for audience Q&A as well. So please start asking your questions. Thank you. All right, Katharine, why don't we start off with you? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Great. So hi, I'm Katharine. I'm the CEO of Elpha, which is a community for women in tech to talk candidly online. I'm a software engineer by training as well, and before starting Elpha, I worked for a number of years at Y Combinator as an engineering lead, and before that, a senior software engineer at MongoDB in New York.
Excellent. So you've seen a lot of companies come through Y Combinator and other organizations, and I've seen a lot of cultures get made and a lot of cultural questions. So
yes.
Really eager to dive into some of the questions and what you've seen throughout your experiences. Manajay, tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Sure. I'm Manajay, and I'm the VP of Engineering here at the Zebra. I've been here about 5 years, since we were about 14 people. Now we're about 160, so seeing a lot of growth. My role is to, ensure that our engineering team can execute and, ship quality software. But it's also around, establishing a safe and collaborative work environment for our engineering team.
Great. Excellent. So we'll start with our first topic now. And I want to reiterate that the focus of this webinar is really on taking the word culture fit and turning it to your advantage. It's gotten a bit of a pejorative reputation out there where people associate culture fit with really a way to be rather discriminatory. And so what we want to do today is take what we've learned about culture and really give you the tools to be able to figure out which organizations are truly inclusive and diverse. And you can do that by asking them questions about their culture during the interview process, but also sort of kicking the tires around everything from company values to what they have written about themselves or what others have written about them. So before we kick off, though, we should speak a little bit about ourselves and be transparent. So, Katharine, I would love if you could talk first about how your organization focuses on building and maintaining a diverse and inclusive culture.
Yeah, for sure. So at Elpha, since we're a community, we think about it in terms of diversity and inclusion within the community as well as within our company. And so we use sort of the same ideas across both. And so in terms of the Elpha community, it's very important to us to have a very intersectional approach to everything we do. And so thinking about, making sure women of different ages and from different industries and experiences and ethnicities are all included in the conversation, and that our members, when they arrive at Elpha, feel like they're all represented, so there's conversations happening that they relate to, that, they have a shared experience with. And then, if there isn't one, also making it welcoming so that they can be the first person to introduce that new experience, and it feels like a safe place to do that. And so I think that sort of comfort and safety also, very much is true of our company culture. And so, we very much prioritize diversity, from the very beginning, and making sure that folks who join our team feel like really comfortable and safe, expressing, different viewpoints and bringing more sort of interesting and different opinions to the table. Yeah.
And then what about in terms of hiring? Because we want to touch on that as well. I mean, how are you literally going out and seeking out diverse candidate pools so that you can make sure that, and I know you're a company that's focused on women, so you already have that diversity there, but when it comes to racial and gender diversity, obviously.
Yeah, for sure. So I think, making sure that the language we use to describe the jobs at Elpha is very sort of welcoming, and that we don't include, information or requirements that aren't actually required in job descriptions and things like that. And then, making sure that we are welcoming to people from sort of non-traditional backgrounds. And, that's one of the things that's sort of an important part of Elpha's culture, in the community as well. So, we have a lot of folks who are coming into tech for the first time, or they're transitioning from, sort of a different career or from a different background. And so, sort of giving folks from all different sort of backgrounds the opportunity to have, to be part of that interview process, and to try to sort of not ask questions that aren't actually necessary, to ask questions that are really relevant to the job as well.
Yeah, and we're going to get into some of those irrelevant questions too later. So that's great, because it's amazing how I've written about this quite a bit too, what a turnoff it is for people on a number of levels. So, and turnoff is a light word for it. I mean, they literally drop out of your process. So great. So Manoj, I'd love you to talk a little bit about what the Zebra is doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So for us, it's a company-wide initiative. We have, some kind of basics where you have diversity and inclusion and managing bias trainings. And so those are kind of led by, HR or some of our employee resource groups. We have 2 employee resource groups, which were started by individuals on the team just coming together. One is called Affinity, and that supports minorities. And then the Shebras, which supports, women, and both are inclusive of, not just women and minorities, but their allies. And those groups do a lot of work to make sure that we're always focusing on diversity. Going to, a little bit of what Katharine said, like when it comes to recruiting, looking at different sources. So, we view diversity as more than just race and gender. So it's really, attending, university fairs, posting our openings on different job boards, and really understanding that, not everyone has to come from a traditional CX background to be on our engineering team. And so I think that's something that we really try to focus on as well.
Great. Already some really interesting questions coming in too that I'm seeing around how to build diverse teams as well. So we'll get into those. So let's go to the next topic here, where we're getting into the meat of the webinar, which is really around how to determine if the culture is right for you based on cultural questions. So what questions should candidates ask themselves to determine what a good culture means for them? Manoj, I'm gonna start with you because you had some really interesting answers when we talked before on this.
Yeah, so, for me, I think what I encourage people to do is really reflect on your own values first. What is important to you? What is that day-to-day environment um, that you want? What do you want your day-to-day interactions with people and other departments to look like? Because once you actually can reflect on that, then it's going to be a lot easier to dig into what the company you're looking at is doing and how that actually aligns with you. And it'll help you, and I think we'll talk about this later, but catch like buzzwords that may not align with what you actually find valuable. But that culture as a whole, we think are, oh, well, company has this or that must mean it's a great culture. But really those day-to-day interactions and your values are what I think you should be thinking about.
Yeah, I mean, for me, what's really interesting is that whenever I've designed my own set of values, it's like basically how far am I willing to go for the company? Like it sets a barometer for me. Or so transparency, for example, if I were at a company that didn't let me be transparent about the work we were doing and they were cagey, and I wouldn't be able to survive there. I just wouldn't be able to go to work there day in, day out. And or conversations around having a blameless culture, for example, those kinds of values. Like you're not going to learn if that's not a value or a cultural principle as well. So something that you can't survive around. So I love the fact that you actually write down what it means to you. Katharine, what are your thoughts on reflecting on your values?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that, thinking about what your personal priorities and values are first is like the most important part and like the very first step. And I also think those can change over time. So, if you did it for your previous job search, I think taking some time to still update them and think about where you're at is really important. And then also what your goals are. So, you could have been in a place before where you loved working really late into the evening and having like a super tight knit team. And now you might be in a place where, you're craving more of a work life balance. Maybe you have a family and you want to make sure that you have some time to spend with them. So I think, just figuring out where your priorities are and, how those align with the folks that you're going to be working with. I think also thinking about like what is fulfilling work. So what will make you happy on a daily basis? It could be the mission of the company. It could be working on like a really sort of intellectually stimulating, tough problem. Or it could be something, totally different that's very unique to you. I don't think there's a right answer there. But then, and I think also thinking about the types of people and personalities that you really enjoy and that you find energizing. And if there's anything that's sort of a deal breaker in terms of people or work, I think identifying those things too. So, for me, like honesty and also transparency is also really important. So those are things that I probably wouldn't compromise on. And I think knowing where you are willing to compromise and where you aren't is also really great.
Yeah. No, I think that's incredibly important. I also the other thing I want to point out for people is, and a lot of people have probably seen this, but there are companies that literally interview using their culture code. Like Amazon is one of them, right? So they ask people to answer questions based on their cultural set of principles, and so it's something that people literally have to prepare for before they even walk in the room. And so doing that as an exercise for yourself beforehand with any company, I think not only allows you to see where you want to belong, but it also is just tremendous in showing the company how much you've thought about, your contributions to the organization as well. We're getting some really interesting questions in here, including one around, I just want to throw this in. Culture fit is widely used as the standard reason for why a candidate isn't hired, often legitimizing the real reason, which is based on a discrimination factor, gender, age, race. Is this foil becoming more recognized? And can you talk about the difference between culture fit, i.e. conformity, and belonging? So I like that I'm starting to see like Pat Waters over at ServiceNow talk about belonging. She was at LinkedIn. She was the chief people officer at LinkedIn versus culture fit. Are you seeing that quite a bit? Katharine, are you seeing that in your community of people talking about belonging more than culture fit now?
Oh, for sure. I mean, I think that is, a big part of sort of the way the culture, company culture is evolving, and the fact that now, the idea of what culture means is sort of being more clearly defined. And I think actually a lot of the times culture can be the fact that you want to have people who are all very different. And so, creating a sense of belonging can actually be part of your culture. But I think it's for sure and I think also like just the way there are so many places for people to sort of express themselves online now. The idea of, identity and having a unique one is, something that people are more and more comfortable with, I think, and putting out there, and how that fits in with, work, especially now that, the idea of work is changing so much. So I think it's a really interesting topic for sure, and something that people are talking about a lot, and I'm talking about a lot on Elpha too.
Right, because belonging is what it's about the individual versus what they have to conform to. So I think
exactly.
That's a great question. Menajay, do you have anything to say on that, or?
I think the only thing I would add is, going back to, creating a diverse team and getting people with different backgrounds, is something that we all know we need to do, and it's actually better for the business. But that could also lead to maybe this lack of belonging, because now you have the same job as someone, but you're from totally different backgrounds, and you might not get each other. And I think, I mentioned our employee resource groups. That's an area where we can give people maybe that sense of belonging that's a little bit even stronger, because they are maybe just so different than some of their peers. And so you can find that in different areas within your company, so that you have that belonging and also get to do this thing that you really want to do with people who might be different than you. So I think that kind of helps as well.
Yeah, I just want to add one other thing, which is I think, especially as teams are becoming more inclusive, I think there's more opportunity, or not opportunities, but more situations where you are, a person who looks different or feels different in some way. And so I think, whether you find those communities within your organization or you find them outside it, I think it's really important to sort of find the people that you relate to and identify with. And that's one of the things actually we do on Elpha, right, for women in tech, is create that space. So if you're the only woman on your team, you don't have to feel like an only in all aspects of your life.
Yeah, no, and I think there's so many great resources out there that are trying to allow people to connect. I mean, we have a great question here from Kay too about how you get to feel for a company culture. I need to put my glasses on. How can you get a good feel for a company culture to even know if you want to target that company? Website readings, etc., are great, but don't necessarily give you the real feel. And we all know a lot of that stuff is super canned too. If you don't have contacts in the company, what is the best way to inquire and learn about it? I have two sides to this coin, as like someone who runs a company, and there's information out there where I'm like, who wrote this? This person did not even work at my company. And then there's the stuff so I'm not going to answer the question. I'm just going to tell you that it's like I struggle with it myself from someone who actually runs a company too. So Katharine, I'd love to hear what you have to say about it.
Yeah, I think this is really interesting. I think, so there's lots of different perspectives you can get. I think one is people who are currently working at the company. So if you have, access to a person, like either reaching out cold on LinkedIn or reaching out through your network, seeing if someone will have a coffee chat with you or a quick phone call, I think is great. Then, if you can find folks who used to work at the company, if it's a large enough one, learning about their sort of experience that's a little bit removed can be really helpful. I think the one caveat there, of course, is, depending on how long ago they were an employee, it may not still be super relevant. Like if it's a startup and they were there super early and now the company has scaled a lot, their sort of experience there is probably going to be quite different. And then, I think the things you read online, it's sort of difficult. Like in both cases, whether it's written by an employee or by the company, you sort of have to take them a little bit with a grain of salt or skepticism, because there's an agenda. There's always an agenda. And so, I think the best way you can really get information is by talking to people. and sort of getting that more candid, get that more candid information.
Yeah, I'll just add to this too that I think people say, well, what if I don't know the person, as Kate points out here, and don't have contacts? But we are in such a crazy hiring market right now where talent is so much in demand that especially if a woman in tech reaches out to someone who's within their field at a company and says, I'm thinking of applying, I know what the response rates are on them, and they're very, very high. And in a way, by reaching out and having that list of people that you're going to contact before, and by saying, I want to talk to you about the idea of applying, versus like making them sort of feel uncomfortable saying I've applied, so then they feel like they have to give you something back. It's actually a way better way to start the conversation and to get into the company overall.
Yeah. One thing I want to add to that is also a lot of companies offer referral bonuses to their employees. So they're really incentivized to, meet you. And if they think you're great, refer you, right? Because if you're hired, like they're actually rewarded for that. So I think, thinking about that is really helpful too.
Yeah. So it's just jumping around a little bit too. We got a great one from Erica here about how childless candidates can talk about wanting culture supportive of having a life outside of work. I may not have children, but I also have other important priorities in my life. I love this question because it's really hard and we don't talk about it nearly as much. And I get some really angry, I get some rightfully annoyed emails from women who come to events and say, like, you talked about children way too much, and like, or having families. And I also, I have a life too. And so I'd love to dig into that a little bit. So who wants to go first?
I mean, I don't have a child, so I can take the childless, maybe that will, from my perspective. I think, figuring out how a company looks at work-life balance is kind of what that boils down to, because it shouldn't matter why you want that balance. It should just matter that the company thinks that balance is important, right? That, everyone is here to do a job, but everyone has something outside of this job. And so I think if a company views that as important and sees, like, there might be things that they do to put, there might be mom groups or dad groups or things like that, but do they also have these other things? Like, we have photography groups for everyone who's interested in this, and cycling. And so I think it's really looking at, do they just value your time versus, okay, do you have a significant reason to miss work today? A child's a significant reason. That's a little different. Like, do you have to tell them why you're leaving at 5, or is there a trust that, like, you're an adult, we trust you, we know your motivation, and we want you to work here, and we want you to get rest. So I think it's like, are they asking you for reasons that you want work-life balance? That would be a big red flag to me.
Yeah. Just to add,
No, I was going to ask you to talk.
I was just going to say, to add to that, I think actually, so to me, companies that are very parent friendly is actually, I'm not a parent either, but it's a great sort of way to see how welcoming they are to work-life balance. So it's like, if you feel uncomfortable for whatever reason asking those kinds of questions, sort of getting a sense for how many of the current employees have kids, and like the fact that they are able to like go pick them up in the evenings, that's sort of, I found to be a great proxy to tell whether a company generally prioritizes work-life balance too. I think it can be at times, because I think the work-life balance for parenting is kind of normalized in a lot of ways right now, more so than perhaps it is if you just want to make sure you have time for your hobbies and things. It can be like a nice proxy to sort of get more information. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And we call it more like work-life integration. I think that's part of it with parents. It's like part. I am a parent of 2 small children, and I will. I understand that frustration of before I had children, feeling like I had to sit there to sort of prove that I, could stick it out in the office longer than everybody else, because like it was, I had to put in those hours because I essentially didn't have a good reason to be home, which was very frustrating and very self-imposed in many ways. When I think about it in retrospect, and obviously I'm not saying that's the case for everybody else, but the one thing I have found is not using the word balance as much, but using the word integration and saying like, all right, I have an appointment at 5, and being very transparent. Which is what I counsel. The vast majority of the people that work on my team do not have children, and we now counsel them to literally put in their time in their calendars and just be very transparent about the time that they need to be productive. And we're a remote team as well, so it's very important to be transparent on this end. But my co-founder has 4 children, but she puts in the middle of the day that she's going to exercise class, for example, because that's the only way she's going to be able to exercise. She literally puts, like, she goes to dance class in the middle of the day. And that's because, at 5 o'clock when the kids do get home, there's those 3 hours that she has to deal with them. And then, usually if there's something that she wasn't able to do earlier in the day, she has to catch up later. So it's sort of, it's trying to weave in all these things. But obviously if she wants to be able to do her other hobbies, and so she has to find time during the workday, and we have to be, and we find ways around that because we're transparent about it. It's just a communication principle for us, really, in the end. So, I mean, this actually weaves into a good question by Lindsay on what do you suggest for folks that have unlimited PTO, but the company culture doesn't really specifically encourage using it. I would first ask, like, how do you manage unlimited PTO for everybody? And for us at PowertoFly, we use a calendar that everybody can see, and where we really, in a way, it pressures everybody else to take PTO. I remember my co-founder once said to me, like, the only way you're going to be happy, she takes 6 weeks off every year, which really annoyed me in the beginning as a co-founder of a startup. She said, the only way that you're going to be okay with me taking PTO is if you also take the equivalent amount of PTO. So, and I think asking, in the interview process, like, how do you manage unlimited PTO? Is there a transparent calendar? Like, how often do people opt out of the unlimited? Like, how much time on average should they take? Asking those hard questions and seeing if they actually really manage that properly.
Yeah, I could see too, if you're interviewing with who will be your manager, asking them how much time they take off would be a really interesting indicator. I'm personally leaving tomorrow for 2 weeks, and my team will not hear from me because I'm going to set a good example. But I think, finding out what the people that you're interviewing with or talking to, how much PTO time they take, and also really, see are there any hints of, well, I take 2 weeks off, but I always check my email. Okay, well, why? Because you have to. And so digging into that, like, when I am on PTO, am I still expected to be responsive? I always, when I talk to people about we have unlimited PTO, and I go, this does not mean we don't want you to take time off. It's the opposite. And for us, we're usually going in and saying, you haven't taken a day off in a while. I think you need to. And so it's really like asking what they do, I think, could be a good indicator of how they treat it.
Yeah, totally. I think, to that point, like the behavior of the people in charge, managers, founders, says a lot about sort of the tone for what you can expect. And then also, we work with a company that has a bonus for the first time that you take a vacation that's of a certain length. And I sort of like that too, because it sort of encourages people to feel okay about taking vacation. So anything like that, where they have it baked into their culture and sort of their sort of perks, I think is a very promising sign. And then also, during the interview process, right? If you're getting emails like later in the evening or on weekends, I think that can be also really telling about sort of the PTO and also, balance component as well. So just sort of assessing the behavior of your interviewers and asking them about sort of how they take vacation, I think is really great too.
A really important point. I see this a lot, especially we work with huge companies, and sometimes you can, whoever's interviewing you in the interview process is so telling of the culture. We've dealt with, with people on talent acquisition side who just seem terrified that they're not gonna, that they sort of operate from this place of fear, and you can see it in the interview process and how they handle people and what they're able to say. And so being able to like have your radar on for stuff like that is so key. So one of the things is like when people are emailing, but also are they responsive to you in a way that seems human?
Yeah.
And not scary robotic. And when you ask them a question, are they not worried that they're going to like get into a litigious situation or something by how you answer you? So, and I'm not saying that's a big company thing by any means, but I have seen that like working across a huge swath of companies. So, great. I just want to clarify what I said to Kay about the people that you should be reaching out to on LinkedIn to get information. I mean, my suggestion is actually you reach out to like someone who's in the group that you would be interested in working for. So not an HR person, because I don't know if you get those kinds of, like, you're really looking for a reverse reference, someone who can tell you who's going to be able to really give you sort of the idea of what it's like to work there day to day versus, through the hiring to the HR process. All right, let's see. Don't want to, all right, sorry, I'm trying to make sure I'm getting everybody's questions here. Oh, and I will say that if we don't get to everybody's questions too, we have them recorded, so we'll go through them again and try to respond to people one-on-one. Remote. Do we want to talk about remote? We got a good one from Svetazar about how about the culture fit for remote workers who are not together with the team all the time, but most interactions happen over Slack or Zoom, similar platforms. Should there be a separate company culture for a remote team, or it's part of the company's DNA? How should companies handle their remote workers? I can certainly speak to this as remote, but whoever wants to take it first.
I can start. I mean, it's definitely not an easy thing to do, right? Like the things that you do in person are harder. So there's, just the logistics, the tactical, like invest in great, quality, like video and chat solutions so that it's not, a pain point every time, like, oh, we have to get on a phone call, or, oh, we have to get on video. And it's like agonizing to people. So, we did that. We have teammates in Nigeria, Kenya, Indiana, Colorado, Connecticut, New York, and so, but the bulk of our team is in Austin. So when you're not fully remote and you have like a headquarters, it can also almost be harder because you then have one-off folks. And so we invested early in just like quality solutions, because that takes one pain point away. Really guiding people to not just ask the question to the person next to them. I mean, it's really an effort for everyone, and making sure that's top of mind for everyone. We actually have a computer that we've set out because we have one person on a team who's remote, and we just have him on video chat all day long. And he can come and go as he pleases, but everyone tries to think of different solutions. And I think the important part, at least at a leadership level, that people have to think about is making sure that this person has, the same expectations, the same say, the same, like, they aren't treated any different, and that they aren't, any meeting, like, we have overlap, a certain amount of overlap with our teammates in Africa. And so any team meeting has to happen before that hour. Otherwise, you need to wait till the next day. So I think just really taking those things really seriously is helpful, but also for the remote candidates, figuring out how you can jump into things, advocating for yourself to be involved in more things is going to be, you got, for the first few weeks at least, remind people that you're there, and that you're not going away will be helpful too.
Yeah, the screen thing is key. Yeah.
Yeah. A few things I was going to add is I think one of the things that can be really hard is building trust with people that you're not in person with. And so learning more about sort of how the team approaches sort of the getting to know you phase when you're new and you're remote, how they integrate you into the team and you get to know people and you get comfortable with them, and whether they have thought about that before, have that sort of process in place, or if that's something they're thinking about for the first time. I think also figuring out how feedback is given in a remote context, you know, because that's sort of the next step with trust, and whether that there's a process around that, or a mechanism to do that that the team has done before. It's sort of, you know, if it's all written feedback ad hoc over Slack or something, that could work for some people and not for others. So figuring out, and you know, there's lots of room for misinterpreting people's language and things like that. So I think thinking through all those pieces is really important. And then understanding whether the team is remote first, or whether there are only a few people on the team who are remote. I think that can make a big difference in terms of what the remote culture is like. So, you know, Elpha, for example, we're totally distributed. So we think a lot about how we communicate, like, you know, and document everything from our meetings and all those kinds of things. But, you know, I've also been on teams where I'm the only person who's remote. And so sometimes I'll get forgotten, you know, they'll forget to dial me into the meeting or something like that. So I think, you know, just sort of knowing what the remote setup is and how much remote team members are prioritized. And then also just thinking about like growth opportunities, you know, even though you're working from afar, you know, I'm sure you still want those chances to grow and develop both, you know, at the company, and then also, you know, actually take classes or whatever it is. And so understanding sort of how that works at the company for folks who are far away. And then actually one that just popped into mind as I've been talking is how the interview process works for remote candidates. So, you know, there's a company that we're working with, Applicable, that has like their whole interview process you can do remotely, which is really interesting. And so, you know, if they do that, then you have the opportunity to sort of see what the remote culture is during the process too, which I think is really interesting. And if they do that, you also sort of have a sense for the fact that they're you know, remote ready, and they've really thought about it before. So I think those are also good cues.
Yeah. Asking them the tools they use, how they manage across multiple time zones, feedback, obviously the feedback loop. Yeah, we were fully remote. We actually did a big webinar with DigitalOcean yesterday, a fully remote company. They do things to also make their remote employees feel very included, like they have monthly snack subscriptions and coffee subscriptions.
Oh, nice.
But I think one of what's so key is also just a daily stand-up, no matter what, always having that daily check-in where everybody can just be together and really feel like that they're all communicating on the same page. And then, you know, obviously throughout the day as well. Let's see, we got some good ones here coming in. So Lindsay says, I think I struggle with, it seems like most of our D&I efforts are focused on recruiting and tend to overlook the women and marginalized groups we already have at the company. I'm starting to hear more and more of this. I would love some tips on how to present the importance of focusing on helping our current employees thrive. And B, what kinds of successful internal programs and such you've seen to increase success retainment for those that are already hired. I will say this is something that we're working on with very big companies as well as fast growing companies. So what we do actually is provide daily video chats where we have like an expert, we have a woman from the company be able to come on and really showcase what she's working on, to be not only be heard, but also to, you know, really inspire the other women around her and see if they can, we have to facilitate these video interactions, but then people can connect one-to-one afterwards. So that's something that you can do within your own company, is even sort of set up a lunch and learn. We call them chat and learns, but the idea being like, I'm going to just raise my hand and get, you know, this woman to be able to talk about what she's building, to sort of create that. A lot of it is about creating, it's about coming out, you know, showcasing all the work and the efforts that are being done within the current women, with the women who are there already. So that's really important. I would also ask your company for some budget around events, which have shown statistically that they actually improve retention across the board, which will save the company money over time. So that's really important, and we have some stats on that as well. And so any company that doesn't invest in those kinds of retention programs is really actually burning money in the end.
Yeah,
so,
I would
yeah.
make, you know, the whole diversity and then the inclusion piece, right? Like I think some companies think we'll just hire more women and they'll all just like working here because we hired more, and forget that they need to take an active role. And so if the company's not doing that, like for instance, our Shebras group, you know, we not only was that did, you know, one individual, you know, gather a few folks and say, hey, I'd like to do this, and really open it up to the whole team. Went to, you know, presented to the CEO, like, we'd like a budget for this, and here's our mission. And then we do things like when a woman starts at our company, we intro them to the whole Shebras group. They get taken on like, you know, initial like intro lunch. And I think what we're seeing, what this group did was now then give other employees like make it clear that they could do that now too for a group that they think is really important and that needs to feel included. So I think sometimes, you know, recruiters, hiring managers, they're not maybe focused on the follow-up. And so it's, you know, we can create that ourselves. And so finding, you might start small, but you'll start to see it expand. And then I really feel like you'll see other people go, oh, hey, if you could start that, then I can start my group. And it just has to, like, someone has to start it. And I think it's really important because people do just assume, well, as long as we get, you know, if we hire 10 women, they'll all just be happy here because there's now 10 women. Well, no, not exactly.
Yeah, I think to add to that, like the budget and having the opportunity to meet is really great and important. And at a previous company I worked at, we did that more informally, where we didn't create like a official group at first. We just asked for budget to all go to dinner together, and we started doing that every month. And then once we had the time to talk and get to know each other and realize sort of what our priorities and goals or what we wanted, then we created a group. I think also like asking for coaching is another great one. If you feel like you're struggling to know how to sort of get the things you want out of your role or the company, coaching is a great resource, and I think a lot of companies these days are like glad to offer that to help retain employees. But I think there's also the hard part where the onus to create groups and to do all of this sort of education falls on those people who are feeling like the only one in the room, which can be really tough. So I think, also seeing that your company or, trying to join a company that sort of recognizes that and is doing the appropriate training with managers and management so that they have sort of the vocabulary around these issues and sort of understand them, and they can sort of, try and either facilitate the creation of groups or, make it super clear that they provide budget or, whatever it is really important.
Yeah. There's a lot of stats on this around women's retention and how groups and events are really raise it over time. So let's see. The other thing I also want to mention is this idea around downshifting, which tends to happen to women in the middle of their career pipelines, 35, 40. This idea that like, oh, you should be taking on less hours, and sort of when you see that happening on the management level. So being very cognizant as well from a statistical perspective, and showing that to management. I think at the end of the day, your company wants to perform better over time. And so when you show them like actual numbers that show that their performance will be affected by retention, it makes it, they will invest in these programs. Okay. more questions. So this is an interesting one from Caroline. I'm stuck in a cycle of being a first hire for startups. How do you make sure the culture isn't fake? I thought I was in a good place, but I didn't get certain benefits. Pay was reduced, um, and no real vacation days, just time off for health crises. That sounds pretty rough. So,
Yeah.
but I've actually been through that myself. I was in a startup that was very touch and go for a while. So, Katharine, what do you want to say about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is, right. So process is something that gets created over time as problems emerge when a company is growing. And so when you're the first, you're sort of there before the process. And so I think that sort of scenario is pretty, I won't say common, but can certainly happen. I think, some ways to sort of try and figure out what's what before you join is to do a contract to hire role. So that's something, especially with a startup where everything's a little bit more informal, I think things like that are more possible. I think the other piece is just asking really good questions during the interview process for, making them less theoretical and more practical about, who in the company has taken a vacation in the last 6 months, questions like that, so that you're getting like very concrete answers. And it actually makes me think, I have a friend who built a tool called Culture Queries. The company's called Key Values, where you can plug in different metrics, and she'll give you like a bunch of different questions that you can ask that are like super concrete and specific to get to the bottom of some of these things. But I think the other part is, hopefully you're at an organization where you can give feedback. And so I think, being able to sort of impact the direction of the company and the culture as it's developing and the processes that are going to be created, it can be exciting. I think you have to want to do that, of course, but I think it is sort of an opportunity. So if you do find a startup that's really great, they don't have any of the things you think they should, but they're like very open to evolving, I think that's still an interesting opportunity too, because you can have a huge impact there. But it kind of depends what you want.
Yeah, I would maybe add to that, like to what you're saying, like finding out what the culture is gonna change. Like, I've seen our team, like I said, go from like 15 to 160. It's going to change. You just can't keep what you had at 15. And so if you're asking them what they value and what's important to them, then at least you can be maybe a little bit more confident that the culture is going to change, but it's always going to revolve around, collaboration and compassion and low ego and, whatever you're looking for. So what do they value? Knowing that, okay, we might do more outings because we're only 5 people and we get excited and now we're 160 and I don't know who just walked right past me, but what are our values, and making sure that so that you can help drive that shift. And then to Katharine's point, making, finding out if you can be part of that process is super important.
I also think in this situation, Caroline, it sounds like you were told the truth, which is a big flag as well. And probably sounds like there's some financial issues there. So,
I think honesty and transparency is a huge one. So, totally agree.
I also, we have this pre-submitted question on language cues, what language cues can candidates look for. It touches on this, and you both had some great answers. So to give people sort of like actual takeaways, I liked what you said, Manoj, about being in a big family. So can you talk about that a little bit? Language cues to watch out for that are flags?
Yeah, I mean, it's an easy thing, I guess, when you're hearing like, we're all a big family, we work hard, play hard, like all of those just like buzzword terms, that's great, but what does that mean? And so for me, the things that I'm looking for, the words I want to hear are really about, go back to that day-to-day interaction, because sure, you can have fun at a happy hour after work on Thursday, but how was, 9 to 5, Monday through Friday? So that interaction, is it, are you hearing words like collaboration, compassion? Are you, versus those work hard, play hard? Because I think that to me is nice. I always say we're not a family, we're friends because we choose to be together. We don't have to be together. And it,
so
depends on your family life, but I just, we're a chosen family, if you will. So, things like that.
Yeah.
Maybe that's why I bristle when people are like, we're family. And I'm like, ugh.
I think the other issue I have with the family thing is that it's a blurring of boundaries, and not everybody wants to have those boundaries blurred, and you don't have to work at a company or a startup or whatever it is, and that's okay. And so, to me, that's another reason why it's a red flag.
I totally had someone like that. It just explains everything why it didn't work out. So that makes a lot of sense. Great. So, I mean, Katharine, you had some stuff here too, like around being explicit in their language. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I think companies that are comfortable talking about why they think diversity matters and hearing, things that sound authentic, right, that don't sound canned or sort of like, sounding like something that is actually like specific to their company and how they're thinking about it, that they have thought about how they want to make their team inclusive and approach building a diverse culture. I think, that they've thought about it before, that they can articulate their plan, that they're comfortable saying it, I think are all really good cues. And I think also thinking, trying to sort of pick up either by hearing people at the company speak to each other or trying to sort of ask some questions about it to learn about how managers speak to their reports and cross-team collaboration happens, and just those sort of like health checks that people who don't have to be sort of talk to each other kindly because they it's your manager, they still choose to and are still like sort of behaving really, really professionally and kindly to each other. I think it's really important.
Yeah. Great. Rosie, I got a great question from you, but I'm going to email you. I have your email with some of the research questions that you were asking for as well. So I just want to point that out. We don't have many minutes left, but I do want to touch on ageism a little bit because that was a question that came up, and I get that more and more. How do you suss out sort of ageism within a culture and an organization? So interested if either of you have had any experience on this level. I have. So
maybe this is a hard one. Like, it's definitely something that's out there. It could be I'm thinking it could be as simple as asking for a tour of the office. And like, if it, obviously it's a little different for remote, walk around and see what it looks like. When I first started, there wasn't a big gap here when we were 14 people, and now there is. And so it could just be as simple as look around. But I'm not, honestly, that's a tough one.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think, as an engineer myself, it's something that I think about a lot because I think ageism in engineering is a thing. I think, if you can look online at like on LinkedIn at who works on the team and like how many years of experience they have, that's probably, even if they don't put their graduation date or whatever in, that's a good proxy. And seeing that everyone's not 25 and under or something, and also asking, there's some interesting questions you could ask, like how the company thinks about engineers who want to have like a long career as independent contributors versus becoming managers, and like whether they thought about those kind of like growth pieces that are important to engineers that are a little more senior and are a little older. I think is an interesting question you could ask too.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because it's all hopefully going to happen to us, and we're hopefully all going to get old and be able to keep working. And so it's shocking to me just the amount of discomfort that it ensues. I mean, I actively have to get on the phone with women who write me back around our events, with Fortune 500 companies, and say, why would this company ever want me? I'm over the age of 50. Do you know that? Are you aware? And those are the women we have to get on the phone with, and we have to say, well, actually, we're under the gun with this company to show them profiles of women with your experience level. They're not looking at your age, but they are asking us for senior level women, and that includes older women who are particularly hard to find. And so I find that once you actually take the extra step and get on the phone with them and talk to them about the skill level that is required, then you open the door there. But there's an incredible amount of discomfort out there, especially in the talent population. It's just not being addressed. So it's really interesting. All right, I'm gonna see if we have any other questions. So we're almost at the end here. I want to make sure that I'm leaving with a little bit of time to talk about Indeed Prime, who've been wonderful partners in bringing people to this webinar. So Indeed Prime connects technical talent to software IT, DevOps, product, and other roles with leading companies like eBay, HomeAway, and Overstock.com across over 90 cities. They find what's important to you and help land you your dream job. So thank you to everybody who came in through Indeed and for helping us put together this wonderful webinar. And then a little bit more about Power2Fly. And then we're going to talk about Elpha and the Zebra. So let's go to the next one. So Power2Fly is, we're really the global platform connecting women, non-binary, and gender non-conforming people with companies that understand how important diversity and inclusion is to actually building real businesses that are going to grow over the long term. We do a lot of inclusion programming where we showcase women within companies, and then we do a huge amount of in-person and also virtual events for companies looking to bring in more women. So would love to see more of you on Power2Fly within our community as well. And then also introduce you to the wonderful community of Elpha, which we're excited about as well, because a rising tide takes all ships. So we need more women's voices out there coming together. So Katharine, talk a little bit about what you're doing.
Yeah, for sure. So we are a community for women in tech to talk candidly. So it's a private space. You become a member and then you can kind of talk about anything you want with other women in the industry. And so the idea is that you can talk about, those issues you're running into where you feel like you're the only one at your company and you need some advice from other women, other advice through the female lens, where you're getting sort of that intersectional perspective from a lot of different women with a lot of different lived experiences. So.
And the Zebra, we can talk about other things too.
Yeah, insurance. It's not as boring as it sounds. That's always my tagline. Yeah, we're a search engine for auto insurance. Just trying to disrupt an age-old industry there. So pretty fun stuff.
And everybody needs it, right? So, and you're in Austin?
We're based in Austin, and then have some remote teammates.
Great. And are you hiring?
We are hiring. Yes, we are.
Great. On the hiring front, I do want to say that we have hundreds of remote jobs as well on Power2Fly, and also tens of thousands of jobs with companies across the world, as does Indeed. And so please check out all these wonderful platforms that I just talked about. And I'm going to give everybody 2 minutes back of their lives. And thank you so much for joining today. And also for those of you who ask very specific questions, we have your information. We'll be getting in touch as well. And so will the teams from Elpha and Indeed Prime as well. So thank you for sharing that with us. All right, goodbye. Happy Wednesday. Thank you.